Welcome to the Peterson's Bow Hunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Now, here's your host, Associate Editor, Mark Dempko.
So, hey, everybody, welcome to the Bow Hunting Podcast. I've been super excited about this episode for a long time. You know, when you think of whitetail deer hunting, you have these great big buck destinations across the country, Ohio, the upper Midwest, you have Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, of course. But one area you may not hear a lot about, but it's really up and coming. I wouldn't even say it's up and coming. It's been around for a long time, is southern West Virginia as a trophy bow hunting destination, specifically the four counties of McDowell, Mingo, Wyoming, and Logan. And I have some really special guests who have joined me today to talk about this. I'd like to call it a sleeper area. You guys live down there. You may not say it's a sleeper area anymore, but we have Nick Hoffman, who's the assistant district game biologist for the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources. We have David Miller, who is a biologist who works with habitat management with local landowners down there, also an avid bow hunter, and Jamie Ferguson, who is an avid bow hunter who hunts down that area. And Jamie took a monster whitetail in Ohio this year, but we're going to ask him why he makes the trek down to southern West Virginia when he has some great bow hunting much closer to home. But thank you all for joining us on the program.
Yeah, good for having us.
Yeah, and I've known about this part of the state for a long time, but it's not an area that you see covered in the media on podcasts and things like that often. So hopefully I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here. But Nick, you grew up in that area in southern West Virginia. Has it always been a great whitetail area, or is it something where the whitetail numbers were actually really low? I know that's old coal country down there.
So yeah, I grew up in Wyoming County, and you go back into the 70s, and our deer population throughout the southern coalfields was significantly decimated. Back in 72, that was when the first removal of a firearm season occurred, and that was in McDowell County. And then I think it was around 1979, the removal occurred for the other three counties, which made all four of those archery-only since 1980. I grew up there in the 80s and the 90s, hunted there, and it was rare, based on my experience, to even see a deer. Most of the hunting I did during that time, which I was a young hunter, started out like most of us probably have, squirrel hunting. With squirrel hunt, but it was funny. You look back on it now. When I was a kid in school, if we seen a deer, it seemed like the kids talked about it for 2 weeks, just the detection of a deer. But and what's changed is when that firearm season was removed, you basically allowed the population to rebound, even though it is slow. It has been slow just because you have a lower carrying capacity in that type of habitat. But what we have now is you have an older population of deer. You expect, as a hunter, there's a greater chance you're going to see a true mature buck, much greater chance there than in a county where you would have much more efficient hunting methods such as firearm.
Yeah, and when you mentioned their archery only, I want to be clear with everybody who listens to the podcast. A lot of times you think in today's world you can hunt with either a compound or a crossbow. In that area, unless you have a special permit, it is compound only. There is no crossbow hunting in there. Is that correct?
Yes, it is compound or traditional. Crossbows are only permitted for hunters that have a Class Y permit, which is basically a permit that is issued to someone that has had a physician sign off that they basically have very limited use in their upper extremities to pull back a compound or a recurve.
Yeah, and you talked about the deer population growing, but it's not like there's a deer behind every tree. But on the flip side, some of those deer live to an older age class.
Yes. Based on our surveys that we run, for our minimum sample size, when we want to survey a county, we still have trouble even meeting those minimum sample size requirements down there in those counties because it is a lower density, and that just goes to habitat. West Virginia is known as a mountain state, and southern coalfields, they illustrate that very well. It's steep terrain. primarily contiguous forest with limited edge and limited bottomland habitat. So it's, when you talk about habitat quality, the habitat down there would be considered really poor. But there's some good deer hunting opportunities there because it is an archery only hunting opportunity in those 4 counties.
Yeah, and I obviously that factors into it, but the deer have a chance to escape some of the hunting pressure when you don't have gun pressure on them. And is that something where you foresee that it's going to stay archery only for the long haul? Has there ever been talk about changing it?
We have public meetings every year, so we have one of those meetings is down in Logan, and we'll have that here in a couple of weeks. And it always comes up. There'll be some hunters that want to know about possibly having a limited, maybe a 3-day, some short season for like muzzleloader. In my opinion, I don't think it's going to change. It's not going to change anytime soon. And even if it would, I think there would be a quick negative impact on that population, because the reason it was removed was because, hunting with a firearm, you were 10 times more efficient than with archery equipment. So I think we could quickly set ourselves back 50 years into the past if we would ever open up a firearm season. And so I don't foresee that anytime soon.
Perfect. Great. Thank you for that. And David, I know you live in that area. You mentioned you're a biologist. You do a lot of habitat work and land management work with the landowners and leases down there and things like that. When you look at the deer hunting down there, how would you say the hunting pressure is as far as archers, bow hunters?
It's increasing like you said earlier, the cat is starting to get out of the bag. It's the pressure is increasing year to year, but I also believe that the sort of management-minded culture is beginning to grow in our region. Nick had mentioned, the age class of the deer being able to reach a greater age, and within the past 4 years, I've taken 2 bucks that one has been 9 years old, another been 10, based off of watching trail cameras. Just crazy. The ability for these deer to reach older age because of the terrain and because of the archery only, it does create that. Even like he was saying, also the habitat does limit these deer to a certain point. But also because of some of the old reclaimed surface mounds, there is some good woody browse and early successional growth. But the hunting pressure, back to your question, it is increasing the further along we go here, and the more popular the archery only counties become.
And thank you for that. And obviously, once word spreads, you have more and more people who will be interested. Now, bow hunting can be somewhat of a limiting factor there because you only pull from a certain percentage of the hunter pool overall. But have you seen interest from landowners and people who lease land down there to maybe do some habitat enhancement work? If so, how have you been involved with that? And what have you seen as far as growth and interest?
Yeah, I started a company this past year called Whitetail Management, and it is all about that. How we have to manage our properties here in the mountains is very vastly different from the central part of the United States or in the West, because we have small little pockets like gas wells or little portions of old abandoned surface mines. We only have small areas that we have to work with. So we kind of got to do the best with what we got. But people are starting to wanting to work their land more to develop these their properties, and that's a growing thing to help improve the nutrition for the wildlife. It is growing, and I know the DNR, they do projects on some of their land in some of the WMA areas. And they plant plots and do certain things, and it's a good system they have as well.
And thank you for that. And now, have you done work with trying to established food plots and things like that, maybe on where you're hunting or with some of the landowners? I'm guessing you had to look at some special blends or do some special work to get different clover blends and alfalfa and stuff like that to grow or whatever you might put in.
Very, very, very good points that people don't realize that, certain species of even clover, some are more like shade tolerant than others. Some are more drought tolerant. So depending on where you're going to plant those species, you want to select the right species for that environment. But yes, that I've done a lot of work in regards to that. Yeah, that's something that people are starting to pick up on as well. The soil that we deal with is not the best. So planting cover crops, the whole process of mining nutrients, pulling nutrients from the ground up into the stem of the plants, cover crops fall over, and that creates topsoil. So building that topsoil, mining those nutrients, people are starting to understand that concept. But yeah, the education of that is growing well in our area. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And we talk about the deer population maybe not being prolific like it might be in southern areas of the country, but can we put it in perspective? I mean, if you're a good hunter and you know what you're doing, are you going to see a couple deer a day, or is it going to be like the Northwoods of Maine where you may only see 1 to 2 deer in a whole week? I think when everybody has a different view when it comes to what a good number of deer are, so and also depends on the property you hunt, the terrain, and the availability of food and cover.
It does, that pressure. Some people have the mentality there are not any deer in these drainage areas, when in reality, when you run trail cameras, it sort of opens your eyes, maybe because that area is pressured more. Those deer may be nocturnal. And then you run a trail camera and you're like, oh my, I had no idea these deer were even in this. But I'll say this, there are pockets of areas within these regions that do hold more deer than other parts. And a lot of that does have to do with nutrition and topography, the way the land is laid out.
Thank you for that. And Jamie, when we started the podcast, I mentioned that you took a really big buck in Southern Ohio. If I remember, it was over 220 inches, an absolute a monster. You also have some really good deer hunting right around your home, but yet you make time to come south. I think you told me it's like over an hour to get to your lease in Southern West Virginia. What brings you down here year in, year out?
Well, year in, year out, you see people like Dave shooting 180-inch deer every day or every year. And
every day? Come on, Jamie.
Yeah, well, the hunting is very good around my local county here in Cabell County. It's like we talked about earlier. I mean, you got a 3-buck limit in the state of West Virginia, and you got access to rifles. And when you got every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there shooting every buck that walks, it gets frustrating. And growing up, that's the way I was taught to hunt as well. So I can't knock those guys too much, but at the same time, I've adapted and enjoy the pursuit of larger animals. I'm not saying it's not. We often overlook the simple joy of just hunting instead of we get stuck up and focused on the rack size, but that's part of the game. All those are pieces of the puzzle of the game you play. And for me, it was just tired of sitting here opening day season and hear 20 to 30 shots within hearing distance. And and half of those are going to be spikes and 4 points that just taken out of the herd. And it's hard to manage any kind of property in those areas. And so that was the one thing that caught my eye the most. And then I got with some buddies that had some property down there, got to see what they were doing, the deer they were getting on trail camera, and it just sparked from there.
And David, when we were talking just a few minutes ago, I noticed, I guess, that's your living room behind you, and you had a quite impressive array of deer. Are some of those from right around where you live, or most of them from, or are they from all across the country?
No, those are all the deer that I have, all of them except one that I took in Ohio on a hunt with a friend several years back. All of those are mountain deer from the mountains of southern West Virginia.
That's absolutely incredible. You think about West Virginia, you don't think about the big bucks, but you're shooting some Boone and Crockett class bucks down there, not just Pope and Young, but you're probably know some hunters that take 180 class bucks.
Yeah. Each year, man, this year it was sort of unnatural. There were, I was a part of two hunts that were of two fellas in southern West Virginia that killed two gross 200-inch deer. So there are, yes, they are here. The terrain makes it challenging, but the deer, they definitely are here. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I wanted to circle back to you, Nick. Obviously, working with the DNR, you have a good handle on the public lands down there. Now, I know a few years ago, I want to say it's like 2016, 2017, you started to reintroduce elk into southern West Virginia. And with that came an expansion of public land so that you had land for the elk herd to grow and flourish. So talk a little bit about the public lands you have in those four counties. The Tomlin Wildlife Management Area comes to mind for me because I think that's really grown in recent years. But, when you think of archery-only counties, I think across the country, you tend to think of areas where they're heavily populated, where you have a high human population. Access is almost always through private land or private land owners. It's a little different down there. Now, you do have a lot of private land with your coal companies and your timber companies, but you also have a good amount of public land, don't you?
Yes, throughout the four counties, we have approximately around 73,000 acres. And you mentioned Tomlin. Tomlin WMA itself is going to be just over 25,000 acres. And that was part in due to the elk restoration project. But, there's some other WMAs. The one I think of is R.D. Bailey Lake Wildlife Management Area, which is in southern Wyoming County. That's a 17,000 acre WMA. A lot of good properties. And there is some effort that's ongoing right now to possibly acquire some more property in relation to the elk restoration project. So there's definitely a nice chunk of public land. And as far as that goes, like I said, I grew up there in Wyoming County and I hunted on private property every day, and everybody else hunted that same property. And it was land company property. So even though it was private, there really wasn't ever an issue for us to hunt on those properties unless there was an active mountain site. So definitely a lot of property to hunt. And it is an area where the human population density is very low, and in some respects stable to decreasing. So you have less people there, and the hunting is definitely something worth checking out.
And thank you. And when you talk about the WMA, specifically maybe the ones where you have reintroduced the elk, do you do a lot of habitat work? Does the agency do a lot of habitat work? Because obviously the elk are probably feeding off those restored areas from the old coal mine work and things like that. But that's going to benefit whitetails and a variety of other wildlife species, correct?
So yes, the district that I'm in, District 5, we would have Logan County and Mingo County. So that would encompass Tomlin WMA, Laurel Lake WMA, Big South WMA. And with the elk project and all the surface mine reclamation there, we're utilizing prescribed burns. And then for the valley heads, areas that are relatively level, usually we'll go in. You got to deal with invasive species, so we'll go in and try to remove like the autumn olive with a dozer, and then we'll try to get something on the ground that'll come up relatively well. Usually we'll use like a mix of clover and wheat just to get something on the ground that first year. Clover seems to do really well, and then the other habitat activity that goes on not just in our district but over in District 4, where you have Wyoming County and McDowell, would be timber harvest. So I know there's some timber harvesting going on, or has just occurred, like at R.D. Bailey, then on over in McDowell County in the southern part there, Panther State Forest. So cutting back the timber, that's definitely a habitat practice that will improve the habitat for deer. And that's something that, you look at the history, you go back pre-1970, there was a lot of demand within this state to harvest timber, and then it kind of dropped off. So we could definitely cut more timber in this area. As well.
Definitely. Yeah.
And, sticking with a little bit on the public lands here, how's the access to the public lands? I've hunted public land where the access points are far and few between, and I've hunted public lands that actually some areas have a really good infrastructure. Now, there's obviously pros and cons to that, especially for hunters who want to get away from the crowds and things like that. But how's your access on the public lands in that area?
So on our public lands, there's decent access, but the one thing to remember, if there's not a road that already exists that puts you up at a higher elevation, the difficulty is you're starting at the bottom and you're trying to go up steep terrain to hunt. Now there's some other issues for us, in particular, like at Tomlin Wildlife Management Area. There's some opportunity that I'll be working on in the future for improving the access there with the road network that's there. The issue is we still have a lot of roads that aren't released from the bond that the coal company has. So legally, we can't open some of that access until the coal company gets released with the bond. But a lot of areas, there'll be gas wells on the property, so you will have some road access, even though it's foot traffic only. At least it's a lot easier to walk on a road on the side of the mountain than walking straight up a 35% incline. So there's access there, but it's for somebody that's not from the area, it's not going to be like going out west in the Corn Belt, somewhere where it's a lot more level. You're still going to grunt, sweat, probably have a little blood, some tears to pursue these. Any
a lot of tears.
A lot of
tears.
Yeah. A lot of both. A lot of all those.
And just something else, Mark, to add to that, David touched on it. That's one of the things that changed, when we went to archery only from 1980 up through 2000, that 20-year period, the habitat, there was an improvement because you did have the surface mine reclamation. So there was a lot of deep mining, but you started seeing a transition to more surface mining. And with them removing the tops and then reclaiming that, it does create some open, flat ground that us hillbillies down here in the southern West Virginia, you don't expect to see that. So that has definitely helped out because it's created edge in that contiguous forest and create some opportunities to maintain that as open land and have that edge habitat, which deer, they're edge adapted species, so they need that edge habitat for browsing.
It's funny, you're all talking about how steep the majority, but not all of the terrain is. My first experience in hunting in that country, I hunted in extreme Western Virginia when I was younger. And it's pretty much the same thing. And they don't do a lot of forest cutting anymore. I don't think on the national forest down there. But the first couple of ridges I went up, and it was like I got up and the ridge was several hundred feet deep and the next ridge over was only 30 feet away. I'm joking, but you know what I mean? It's like up and down and up and down and up and down. And I was like, really, am I getting anywhere here? But that gives the deer a chance to escape and things like that. But for all of you, what's your advice if somebody was coming from out of the area and they wanted to have a realistic chance of success? What would you suggest they start with? I mean, obviously they're not going to be as familiar, and you can study things on Onyx and things like that, but sometimes it's hard to beat that on the ground scouting. What's your advice if somebody wants to be successful and they only have, let's just say, 7 days to hunt?
Lace them up. Be prepared. I'd say those first 7 days, the first 2 or 3 is going to be for scouting, unless they just get lucky, because it's like everyone said, it's rough terrain, access is limited, and you got to go deep to get away from people to find them.
Yeah, I would say the same. The more days you have to put towards your hunt, the better. That way you can do some scouting long before you ever start setting a stand or a blind or whatever. A lot of property, a lot of terrain and area to cover down here.
Along those lines. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to say, I would not set a boot on the ground until I had spent many, 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 many hours on Onyx.
Yeah.
I do tremendous amounts of scouting on Onyx, picking apart terrain features. like learning how the terrain lays in comparison to like prevailing winds, and then trying to situate that so that when you do go into an area and set up, you've already kind of got that game planned in the back of your head. You know what I mean? But using those terrain features, like if you look at and I tell people this all the time, before you start looking at details, look at a large area, look at the big picture first, pull up your Onyx, look at the big picture of the area, then start looking at terrain features and how you think the buck will pattern, then zoom in and start finding flats with the topo layers. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question was actually going to be, obviously we all know that you want to pay attention to how you enter, leave your stand. It's not just when you're on the stand. Wind's crucial, but you want to make sure that you're not laying down sand or you're not pushing the deer out before you even get in. I'm imagining that's especially important down there where you don't have a ton of deer. And so my question is, how do you access those areas without bumping those deer off the ridges and things like that, knowing that you may not see another deer for 2-3 days?
Yeah, picking those access routes. Picking those access routes are super important. Finding little ways you can use the terrain, like if there's a ridge, here, finding a way you can get in on this side of the ridge and just pop over and be where you're wanting to hunt. So you don't, if the deer are running this side of the ridge, you don't even have to go over across that trail. You can come from this side of the ridge over. So using terrain features, to kind of block your presence from the area where you feel the deer is going to be, that's huge.
Well, that's a good reason to get out.
Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Because I know you spent.
No, I was just trying to get Dave to teach me how to read those maps, because find those spots and drop me pins.
Yeah.
But no, that's the joy of down there, is everyone that spends any amount of time down there, they earn their success in different ways. I've never been a big map guy. I'm trying to do a little bit more. It's always been foot traffic for me. And I'm sure it's cost me a lot of stuff that I bumped out and never saw again. But that's part of that area that's so good. However, what route you take to get there, that success makes it so much more rewarding, just with all the obstacles you got to overcome.
Jamie, what you said was very good. About you got to put the boots on the ground. I do a tremendous amount of scouting on mapping programs, but once you do that, there's nothing that can replace getting the boots on the ground.
Right.
That just helps eliminate some of those steps for the people that aren't used to the terrain. It just helps them, you know what I mean?
Right.
Helps save some steps and helps them have up their success rate. Yeah.
So, we talked a little bit about the great access you have as far as public land. While access into every ridge and every valley may not be super easy, you do have a good amount of public land. And are there certain times of year where you see a lot of hunting pressure? Do you see a lot more hunting pressure down there during the rut, say early to mid-November, because guys are anticipating that bucks are going to be up and moving all day or most of the day? Do you get a lot of hunting pressure throughout the season? Can guys maybe work around that by coming down early in the year and having some good success when the season opens?
Yeah, in our areas, I do see the uptick in the rut. People are just like everywhere else out of state. But for instance, the lease that I'm on, to me, it actually helps me, because I find the really upkick in the rut doesn't hit towards late November for the area that I'm in. And a lot of people have already been there and gone. And so then you start to see the uptick of the new bucks come in late November for me. Now, I know it varies in every area, but that works wonders for me, as the people that come there early November, they don't have as much success because they think they're going to hit it right in the middle of the rut. And that's not always the case down there, for me personally.
Now, does anybody here do any late season hunting down there, or does it just get too hard?
Oh, it's my favorite time. Yeah.
It gets
thankfully, most years, thankfully, that I usually have one. I've already punched my tag by then. But in the years that it does extend out into December, it's my favorite time of year to be out. The the deer coming to the food sources really strong, and that second rut or third rut by that time, depending on the year, those ruts, the bucks are a little more desperate. A lot of the does have already been bred, and man, to me it's a magical time. And a lot of people aren't out in the woods. The cold is keeping them out, so usually you have the woods sorted to yourself. I love late season. Yeah,
I do too. If you can get beyond the fact that it's going to be cold, living in our area in the Mid-Atlantic region, it's a good time.
Yeah.
You may have less deer in the woods, but you can pattern them a little better. So I've never had a problem with it. I like late archery hunting, and I was just wondering if you found the same thing down there.
Yeah, second week of December, magic. It's good.
Absolutely.
Now, do you run a lot of trail cameras as well? I know obviously you do a lot of Onyx and on the ground scouting. You run a lot of trail cameras to try and pattern one or two bucks as much as you can pattern them in that area.
I run most years between 50 to 65 trail cameras.
Jamie, you do the same?
I'm usually in that area 10 to 15 because we're out hunting around me in Ohio as well. I focus on that earlier, so I'll run the cameras there and leave them there, and then usually 10 to 15 in that area down there on the properties that I'm on.
Awesome. Now, Nick, being with the DNR, you have some a great state park accommodations down there. You have some towns down there. Talk a little bit about, like, if somebody wants to come from out of the area and maybe they don't have the ability to stay in a camper or whatever. Do you have great accommodations in the towns? Can you talk a little bit about that as far as food and lodging and things like that? Because you are talking about a more remote part of the state, but it's not totally devoid of accommodations.
Yeah, town of Logan, there's been a lot of development there. So you're going to have some of the better amenities there with the lodging. And then you do have Chief Logan State Park, which has a full, a top-notch lodge, conference center. So those are good accommodations there. And as far as other private hotel, motel, cabin style lodging, anywhere from Logan up into Man over to Gilbert, a lot of that, you have some opportunities for overnight lodging there. And then even in Wyoming County, there's going to be limited lodging, but you would have some stuff available, like between Osana and Pineville. And then when I think of over in McDowell County around the town of Welch, and then outside of that, I mean, that's right in the heart of the four counties, but Beckley, you're an hour away really from getting down into Wyoming County, and then over around Princeton, Bluefield, Bluewell, which is just east or southeast of McDowell County. So some of those little towns, you don't have the infrastructure that most non-resident visitors would be used to. But there's been some developments, and even down in Williamson, next to the Kentucky state line, there's going to be some nice facilities.
Thank you. And how about, like, if somebody has a conversion van, a rut rig where they stay and they want to just stay overnight? You do allow overnight parking in your lots? Can you bring a camper in some of the larger wildlife management areas, or is that prohibited?
So our state, there's a couple of our wildlife management areas there. It's a cooperative agreement. So, for example, R.D. Bailey, that's a Corps of Engineers property. So they develop campsites there on that property. So you would have camping on that WMA, but it's because it's not a camping that we provide. As far as our state-owned WMAs, we don't have camping other than I think it's Panther State Forest, because that's a cooperative agreement there, where our state park section actually has camping facilities there on that property, even though it's State Forest / WMA. But for typically just WMAs in West Virginia, we used to have camping back years ago, but that's something we've kind of went away from. It's just with the expenses and everything, it's something that you don't see us developing. So that's where we're at right now. But then you also have private campgrounds. I mean, when I think of what the Hatfield-McCoy Trail System has done in that part of the state, Gilbert, for example. I mean, there's a lot that's developed there with camping due to the trail system. So there's definitely some fair accommodations throughout those 4 counties.
Well, thank you for going over all of that, because I know when you're exploring a new area, sometimes too you're able to put all the pieces together, and it can be a bit challenging, especially if you're looking for accommodations in a more rural area. Now we've talked for quite a while about whitetail hunting, but I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you probably have some good bear hunting, even if you're archery hunting opportunities in those counties. Somebody want to talk a little bit about the bear population? Are there a lot of them, or are there a few of them?
You want to call it annoying?
Pardon me?
I said, you want to call it good, or you want to call it annoying? There's some very good bear hunting in that area. There's just a ton of them everywhere you look down there. And it's a lot of trail cameras get ruined. A lot of stuff gets ruined down there. But it's also another rewarding hunt in that area, is because there's not a lot of places in West Virginia to offer that kind of bear population. So it is a good bonus to be there, sitting in a stand hunting a whitetail, and you have a big 300-400 pound black bear roll through on you.
Probably the past 6 years. The past 6 years, I've seen a massive uptick. I remember eight or so years ago, never 8 to 10 years ago, not very rarely seeing a bear. But then I remember starting to see them. I'm like, oh man, that's neat. I got a bear. And now I'm to the point where, gosh, they drive me crazy trying to pursue whitetails. Man, they're just, there's just a lot of them per square mile now in comparison to what there used to be.
With what he said there, I'll jump back to what you talked about earlier about the people coming in early and hunting. That's another reason why I like the late season whitetail down there, is because in the area I'm in up high, the bears stay up high earlier, and they keep a lot of deer run out. You don't see near as much deer activity when the bear are in there. And then as it gets colder, they move low. And that's when you start to see a lot more of the uptick in the deer hunting.
Yeah, Mark, our bear population has definitely experienced increases when you're talking about those 4 southern counties. Just looking at our harvest and our nuisance complaints and what we have to deal with nuisance bear, that would all indicate that we're experiencing a stable to increasing population in each of those 4 counties.
Awesome. Thank you all very much for that. Now, David or Jamie, what's your most unbelievable deer hunting moments that you've been hunting in that county? Now, David, I know you've been hunting down there a lot longer, but you must have one of those moments that immediately pops to mind. Like if you told the story, nobody would believe it.
Geez. Jamie, you go first. Let me be sort of filtering through my head.
I got something that still brings tears to my eyes, but I guess the one that sticks out the most for me. A lot of people wouldn't find it anything, but I hunted this particular deer for a week solid, had him all year long on pictures, watched him grow, watched him develop, and just could not find him, get on him. There was one day that I went, and I think it was 7 straight days that I hunted, and the last day that I was there, I'd sit daylight to dark, and he had come through just after shooting light. And to that day, and I never saw that deer again in the woods. I don't know what happened. I don't know if someone else harvested him or what, but it was just like, it was so cool to know that I put so much effort into him, watched him, pattered him, got a chance to see him from the stand, but wasn't able to shoot him. So it was awesome and heartbreaking at the same time. And that's something that I won't forget for as long as I hunt.
And that's a part of archery hunting. I mean, your chances, you don't have a million of them during the season for most guys, and sometimes you get the shot and sometimes you don't. So Sorry about that.
No, it is what it is. Like I said, it was still rewarding looking back now. For the first couple of days, it was a little rough to swallow, but it is still has a reward to it to this day.
I know mine now. 2011. It was 2011. I was chasing this big deer. I had it patterned. It was coming in like clockwork. It was going to happen opening day of season. A week before season came in, there was a drill rig from a core sampling, gas well core sampling truck came in, set up their well within sight of my stand setup of this big buck. And this buck is still the number one ever taken in Mingo County, one of the southern bow counties. So I come in, I see this well set up. I go check my card. The buck that had been consistently coming in daylight all over it was gone. For the next month, he's gone, totally gone. So I start setting up cameras and grid patterns around areas, trying to pick this buck up. And finally, I pick him up like a half a mile away. Then finally, you know, he was moving a lot then, really nocturnal. He finally came back into that area where I'd originally gotten him. And I was setting on the fringe of this oak flat and this big thicket down in this hollow. And it was beautiful morning, and it was about 9 o'clock. And I'd gotten a couple pictures of him recently coming through. And I thought to myself, man, it feels like a good morning. It was November the 4th. And I thought, man, it feels like a good morning, pre-rut, you know, that they should be moving. And I almost got down about 10 o'clock, a little early for me to go check some trail cameras, but had that gut feeling. Something tells me I need to stay in my stand. Well, about 5 minutes later, I hear across the bowl that I was hunting in, across this hollow, I hear a pop. I thought someone had thrown a rock from the road above. And I was like, what was that? Then I heard a pop, pop. And I was like, what is happening? There was an oak tree. I'm not joking. I couldn't have came close to reaching around. This oak tree, all of a sudden, pop, 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 falls out of nowhere. Beautiful, pretty day, no wind. It falls. And when it falls, the top of this thing goes down into this big thicket. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting? If that buck was bedded down there where I thought he was, and that tree was to spook him. And I'm not kidding, within 2 minutes, I saw a deer slowly. He would take 3 or 4 steps and stop. Then I seen his feet first, and then I could tell he had some antlers. And then when he raised his head, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's that buck!" And he came literally right around the hill and right up the point, 22 yards, and I was able to get a shot. But it's one of those things where I had hunted hard all year for that deer, and it's kind of one of those moments where God says, "I'm gonna help you out a little here." I see the effort.
That's an awesome story. Did you get the deer, and you know, what did it score? Oh my!
Yeah, he scored.
So for those who are listening to the podcast, David went and brought the deer back. He almost didn't get it through the living room doors there, but
had to show you. So he was my first net booner. He was 172 and some change, and I think he grossed 178 or so. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's an incredible deer.
Yeah, that tree though, of all things.
I've never heard a story like that.
Yeah.
I've never heard a story like that where it works out like that.
Yeah. That the whole top of this giant tree falls down into the thicket. And 2 minutes later, I see him easing. It took him probably, 30 minutes to go 100 yards. Like he would just walk a little bit and then stop, and he'd put his nose and went up and wind. He was so cautious. You could tell he did not want to be on his feet. Yeah.
My question is, how far did the treetop land from him? How far do you think it was?
I think when the tree fell, it was across a hollow. The tree was probably, for me, it was probably 600 yards. I watched it. Boof. And it probably, from where he came, it was probably 150 yards, 200 yards from him. Yeah.
That is an amazing story. The last thing I wanted to touch on as we're starting to wrap up is, do you guys hunt out of climbing stands, or what I really wanted to ask is, do you hunt out of saddles? Have you seen a growth in saddle hunting in that area? And has that been a game changer for hunters down there?
I'll let Dave start with that one.
Oh, I love saddles. Yeah. I hunt a little bit out of, I don't use climbers as much as I used to. I do more lock-ons. But the good thing about a saddle is you can put a stick up or screw in pegs if you're not on public. But you can put that up and have, 10 sticks up and not have to have stands for all of those, and just hunt, use your saddle. And man, I love it, especially if I'm hunting with someone. If I'm bringing someone in to hunt or hunting with my wife, I can put them in a stand, and then I can go up higher than them in a fork in a tree or something, and just hook my saddle in. Yeah, love it.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that you have to be pretty flexible and adaptable down there with the lower deer numbers and the different weather conditions.
Mobile.
And
Stay mobile. Yes, stay mobile.
It's just,
yes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank you all for taking time to talk about the hunting down in southern West Virginia and the archery-only counties. Like I said, it's something that I've known about for a long time. You don't see a lot as far as coverage in the media, but it is growing, a sleeper area. But you're starting to produce a number of good bucks out of there. So thank you for joining the podcast. And for everybody who's listening, you're looking for a really unique adventure, and you want to put in a lot of hard work, but the rewards might be great, check out the 4 archery-only counties in West Virginia.
Thanks for downloading the Peterson's Bow Hunting Podcast. All bow hunting, all the time. Pick up the latest issue of Peterson's Bow Hunting magazine on your local newsstand, or connect with us online at bowhuntingmag.com.